Hey, welcome back to Green Phoenix RPG, a weekly Dungeons & Dragons podcast from both sides of the screen. I'm your host, Matt, and this is episode 5, The Lighthouse Behind the Screen. So last episode, we talked about session 2 of the campaign. I went over its plot and what happened. But also, I had a little conversation beforehand about plot. The point I was really trying to get across when I was talking about how plot wasn't really important is that while plot is a great way to get your players really drawn into the game, you don't need to spend a lot of time making this really elaborate, amazing plot and beating yourself up over it. If you want to have a really good game, you just need to get the players invested in the game. If the players care about your story and care about the characters, the plot really kind of comes second to everything else. As long as the characters are really good and they're interested and excited to come back and play, the plot is really not as important. Now, that's not to say that plot cannot give your players a reason to come back. If you have a really, really, really good plot, it's going to build investment inherently in the game. But, I have a lot of people who want to run games. I talk to them and they're like, I could never run a plot like that. I don't know what to do. There's all this stuff I need to figure out, like who's the villain going to be, and why is there's no twist, or there's nothing interesting about it. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Your plot can be anything. As long as you know how to make your players care, it's going to run fine. That's really the point I was trying to get across. And to that end, people go on and on about these great plots they see in like Dungeons & Dragons recap posts or stuff on different websites, or the real play videos like Matt Mercer does with Critical Role, or even Critical Hit, part of the Major Spoilers Network with Steven Schleicher. People love that storyline too. And I'm here to tell you, those aren't the best plots out there. This podcast has one of the best plots out there. The best plot out there. The game that you guys ran a couple of weeks ago with your friends, sitting around drinking a couple of beers, that was the best plot ever. And the reason I say that is because whatever plot that you are personally invested in is the best plot ever. So when you have your friends sit around and play this game, the plot inherently could not be as good necessarily as the Critical Role one or the Critical Hit one or even mine one here. But it doesn't matter because you guys are making it. You guys are playing it, you guys are living it, and it makes it the best plot ever. So even though these plots might be inherently better, the fact that you're currently invested in it, your characters are making their choices, you as a DM is moving the plot along, that makes it the best plot ever. So you don't need to get bogged down in all the minutiae of like, how do I make an amazing plot? It's okay if you don't have a great idea. Just do your best. Get the players invested, have a good time, have fun, everything will work itself out. It's still going to be fantastic. We all get really bogged down with anticipation and anxiety about how we're going to perform, especially if it's like your first time or you're very new to being a DM. It can be very nerve-wracking, sitting in front of this group of people looking at you expectantly to give them this amazing plot and this great experience. I get it. Trust me, I have a lot of anxiety myself. I've been struggling with it my entire life. But with Dungeons & Dragons, it's better because you're working with friends, ideally. And as long as you come prepared to the best you can, really try to have fun is the most important thing, it'll work out. It really will. So don't get too stressed out about it. Don't get too bogged down in really writing this really elaborate backstory with all these great, amazing twists and turns and original ideas. It's fine. People always talk about cliches. I talked about it earlier with the whole starting at a tavern thing, which is a big issue with me. But one of the reasons I really had a problem with that is because I've played a lot. I've been playing, like I said, for over 20 years. So this whole starting in the tavern thing is a cliche not only in general, but also with the stories that I've been in. So if you're like trying to build a story, build a game, and you want to avoid cliches, you don't really have to worry about that because even though they might be cliches, they're not necessarily cliches to your group. If you've never done them before, then they've never been done before. You really only have to judge your game on your own game's merit. That's the big thing. Don't compare yourself to other people. That's a good lesson in life anyway. You don't want to sit there and look through Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, all these people, these restaurants, having these great times, going out dancing, like, I'm not doing that. What's my problem? No, all you're seeing is the great things these people did. Even with these D&D games, these recaps these people are doing, or these posts are talking about these great things that happen in their D&D game, you're not hearing about all the other problems they've had. The struggles they've had to make that work, or the plot problems I ran into, a writer's block, etc., etc. Just judge your own game on its own merits. It'll make everything go a lot smoother and make you feel a lot better. Trust me. I mean, like I said, that's just good advice in life. Don't judge your life on everyone else's life. Just judge your life on your own life's merits. So, little PSA there for everybody in the beginning of this episode. And to that end, this podcast is going to do everything it can, myself, the players on here, we're going to have, to give you the tools necessary to really get your players invested. The plot is obviously a great way to do that. It's a really great tool to get players invested, but there are other ways to do it. So don't get bogged down, like I said, in the plot. If you really can't come up with a good idea, grab a module, like I did for this game, or I did for Arc 3. Modules are usually really good plots. Read a few of them, find the one you like, run it the best you can, and then we'll give you some tips, we'll give you some tricks, especially when Nate's on pretty soon, about how to really figure out what your players want, because they're not always going to tell you, like I said in episode 3. Sometimes players don't know how to express that to you, what they really want, because maybe they're new, or they just don't know. They know deep down, but not really how to express it to you. So don't worry, we'll get into that as well. This podcast is going to get into much more specifics on how to do that, because that, it really, to me, is the most important thing in a game, is to figure out what your players want and then give it to them. So, anyway. So episode 2, we talked about, or session 2, we talked about last episode, really was kind of a bridge episode. The plot was really starting to come together for me by the end of that session. I really had a good idea what was going on. So, to give you guys a little bit of a spoiler, I had named the elf villain finally. I had named him in my head Othmeren. I just went to a bunch of websites, found a bunch of syllables that I liked from different elf names and kind of smashed them together to make it. So, Othmeren is the villain right now in the storyline. I knew we'd gotten the Chalice of Queen T'Choa because he was trying to do something. So I thought, what could he really do? I know I wanted to use the lizard men, as the big villains in the game, like the army for the big villain in the game. Because I've always liked lizard men. Orcs and goblins and stuff are kind of the standard trope everybody uses in the beginning. And again, that's what we've done a lot too, so it's a trope for our own group. So I was going to use them as the army. So then I really stopped and thought about it, what are the lizard men really trying to do? And I decided to go with a really classic, standard motivation, which was revenge. So the Ceruleans did something to the lizard men that caused them to want to destroy Cerulean entirely, and Othmeren was going to use this to his advantage to whip them up into a frenzy, and use them as his real muscle. So I decided what would be cool is to do another monster that my group almost never uses, which were Nagas. Now, Nagas are snake people with, human heads. They're from actual mythology. But for some reason, my group has never used them. So I thought, there you go. I'll use something I've never used before, make it kind of interesting. So I made Soth. Was this leader of the lizard men, was killed by the ancestor of Lord Stillwater, Bell Stillwater. So obviously the lizard men want to bring him down, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, so Soth is gone. Lizard men want revenge. Othmeren's using this to whip them into a frenzy, blah, blah, blah. So what is the Chalice of Queen T'Choa all about? So I thought the best thing that Othmeren could do was use the Chalice of Queen T'Choa to bring Soth back. Give the lizardmen back their general, their god, I guess, in a way, and really let them go wild on the Ceruleans, because Othmeren's plan at this point is to try to destabilize the Amaronian government, Amaronian Peninsula, for a much larger purpose, which we will get to later. I have figured it out around here what he was trying to do, but I don't want to spoil everything for you quite yet. So he was using the Chalice of Queen T'Choa to bring Soth back as some sort of great undead monstrosity that still kind of had the memories and feelings of Soth, but was much more powerful than he was before. And Othmeren was pretty powerful in my mind, but I hadn't really figured out his level and what abilities and spells he had. But I knew the Chalice of Queen T'Choa was a really powerful focus, which would give people access to more powerful abilities. So I thought, even if Othmeren's powerful, maybe he's not powerful enough to do this, but the Chalice would make him as powerful to do this. So that's really what he's using the Chalice for. Now, of course, Tiber didn't know this, and Kirika didn't know this. No one else knew this at the time, but I did. So that's really what was going on here. So, with that plot in mind, everything going on, I was running that out and trying to get that all solidified, but I needed to have Tiber do something while I was trying to figure this all out. I wanted Nate to do something else that didn't really get all of this out there yet, because I wanted to give it to him in pieces and not just kind of shoot it all out at him. So I had decided what we could do is deal with how the Lizardmen got the Cerulean ships in the first place. Wasn't really an overly important plot point, but it'd be interesting. Kind of give him an idea that this was a much larger problem. The stealing or the theft of the Chalice of Queen T'Choa was really just one step in a larger plan that had already been set in motion. To really kind of give Nate the feeling that stepping into this game wasn't, taking one step and then all of a sudden the game started. He's entering this world as the world is already turning. Things are already happening. So he's coming in late to the game, so to speak, with Othmarin's plan. Really gives him, a sense that this world is living and breathing and changing with or without his actions, which is really important. We talked about linear games and sandbox games earlier, and the real takeaway from that, too, I want everyone to realize, like I said in there, is that you're never going to have a game that's 100% one or 100% another. So although my games are generally a little more linear, where like the plot moves in one direction and the players follow along, there's never a point where the players have to follow the plot, or the plot stops and just stands still waiting for the players. It just keeps going. So the players, if they decide to not do part of the plot or take a break or move somewhere else, the plot moves on without them. So there's consequences for not following the plot all the time. Sometimes it's worthwhile to do something else and let the plot move on without you, even if there is consequences for it. And sometimes you really need to follow the plot because there's like a real time limit on it. And this actually happens in a later arc, which we'll obviously talk about when we get to it. But the players kind of skip this huge section of my plot because they are convinced that if they stop and deal with it, the consequences are going to be really dire. So they just ignore this entire plot, which would have consequences for the world overall, but in doing so, they really do kind of avoid any major consequences by skipping or taking extra time to deal with it. But like I said, that's in Arc 4. It's way far away, so we'll definitely talk about that. So even though this is kind of a bridge episode where we give some exposition to Nate about Tiber's world, we talked about the Ceruleans and the revenge there. We talked about like Soth and Bell Stillwater, a little bit about the necropolis from Queen Chimaroka. You want to avoid dead sessions. I really did my best to make sure that this didn't feel just like me treading water, waiting for the plot to kind of really pop into my head like it did by the end of the session. A little bit afterwards, actually in real time. It was a few days afterwards I was like, aha, I know what I'm doing. But, I still managed to get some plot across, kind of do some world building with Tiber, which was good. But like I said, I really didn't have a great idea of what I wanted to do when they were going into the session here. So I used Wreck Ashore by David Weiss, which I talked about last episode as well. And I linked that in the show notes last episode. I can do that again here. I don't think it's available for download, but you can read a little bit of synopsis of it. It is up there. And I'm sure if you just Google it, Wreck Ashore PDF on Google, I'm sure you can find it somewhere. So I decided to use the module to really help me move the story along without really having to do a lot of planning for the actual session. I could just worry about my overarching plot to kind of get that going. And if you look at this, if you look at the actual module itself, I didn't really change too much of it. I just changed some of the players, changed kind of what was going on overall in the thing, kind of cut it and moved it around. It's very easy to use a module within your own world to move the plot along. It's a great little strategy, especially if you're stuck. And like I said, last episode, we'll talk about it more. I'm going to go into real detail about this for Arc 3 because I used a module for the entire plot line of Arc 3. Everything was changed to fit the storyline I was doing, but the actual basic plot is the whole module. Yeah, if anybody's curious, the module we actually use in Arc 3 is The Red Hand of Doom by Richard Baker and James Jacobs. So you can take a look online for that one. I'm sure it's available for purchase. It's a 3.5 module. So this whole campaign was obviously 3.5. But anyway, I liked the module Wreck Ashore. It was definitely a one-shot. You could do the whole thing in one session, which was good. So it wasn't going to be bogged down trying to finish this plot while, when my plot was actually set in my head, I wanted to move right along with that one. So that was good. And I liked the sense that I could use the Lizardmen as kind of overarching villains for this one because it was already kind of set up that way, which was nice. And so I introduced Zek, which was a big thing I wanted to do as well because having a one-on-one game, a lot of the party is going to be made up of NPCs. Because having a one PC do all the work for the whole party is very difficult. Combat's going to be very lethal if it's just one person versus all these monsters or villains or whatever. No matter how easy you make it for them, it's always going to be difficult to do that. So the other good thing about getting Zek into the campaign was a very nice, organic, and plot-relevant way to get the backstory of the Lizardmen to Nate. Instead of just having someone go, I was a scout in the woods and I saw the Lizardmen were forming armies or something dumb like that. I could give it to him firsthand. There's a Lizardman who used to live in the Blackwood, whose family was killed by Lizardman tribes, explains who the villain is. This guy Zaros, the Lizardman chieftain. He's uniting all the clans under his, iron fist, murdering people who don't follow his rule. You can assume that this guy Zaros is probably working for Off-Marin, etc. So it really kind of gave Nate, again, a sense that the world was moving and things were happening when he was not involved in it. So things were moving around behind the scenes as well. It wasn't just all based on what Tiber was doing. If he gives a step, and all of a sudden the world would appear in front of him. No. The world was always there before Nate showed up. At least gives that illusion. So that's always good. You definitely don't want to just tell people your plot. You want to have them get involved with it somehow. Have them discover the plot in-game. Don't just have it spoken to them. So let's take a second and let's talk about Zek. Zek and Kirika were the first two NPCs introduced in this game, obviously. Both of them stick around for quite a while in the game. I don't want to give everything away, but Kirika and Tiber have a complicated relationship. You'll definitely see what I'm talking about in an arc or two. Actually, at the end of this arc, things kind of take an interesting turn and kind of go in weird directions. But Kirika and Zek were obviously my voices in the storyline. So when they had a question about history or the setting or wanted kind of to bounce ideas off somebody, he would turn to Zek and Kirika, obviously. So they were kind of moral sounding boards for him, strategic sounding boards, etc. And the interesting thing with these two NPCs especially is they really were good counterpoints for everything going on in the game. Kirika was obviously an idealist. She was very compassionate. She was very good aligned, very stereotypically good aligned. She was a kind of goody two-shoes. So whenever Tiber had an idea, her first thought was the morality behind it, the empathy behind that plan. Like, who are they going to save and who are they going to help with that? Zek was really the opposite. Zek was still a good character by alignment, but his concerns were much more about punishing the people causing these problems and didn't really care so much about saving the people being hurt by it. In his mind, the best way to fix any of these issues was just to find the villains and just kill them, because that would solve any of the issues they were having. Yes, people were dying. Yes, people were suffering. But that's horrible, but let's just find the villains, kill it, and then this won't happen more in the future. So it's a real counterpoint. And you can see that when Tiber goes to conscript the villagers, he's very concerned about the villagers getting hurt. And Kirika's very happy about that. Zek couldn't care less. Zek says, fine, yeah, great, these people don't die. That doesn't matter. If we don't kill the Lizardmen, they're all going to die anyway, so what does it matter? We just need to make sure the Lizardmen die. So it gave a nice counterpoint to everything that Tiber's trying to do. Now, I don't know how people do this in other games. I've gotten really conflicting reports on this. I'm very curious what you guys think. In this game, there are a lot of NPCs. A lot of NPCs. A lot of them join the party. And I always looked up to the players who to include in the game and who to remove. The NPCs always have other motivations, other things going on. They can very easily leave the party to go take care of and then come back later if the PCs feel like there's too many people in the party. So there's quite a few times where I would stop, give the PCs a very explicit, opportunity to remove some NPCs from the storyline or from the party. And my PCs never took that. Tiber, especially Nate, desperately wanted to have as many of these people in his party as possible at all times. He really enjoyed having them there. He liked the characters. He liked the interaction with them. When Stacy joined, my wife, as her character, she did very similar. She really enjoyed a lot of these NPCs, as did Brett when he joined eventually, too. There's a couple of NPCs especially that he liked. They all had a few they liked in particular. Now, I like that. I like having a lot of NPCs. It makes it very fun for me as a DM to have a lot of varied voices to talk to my players about. Really gives me a chance to really kind of play the game. Obviously, the big thing you don't want to do is you never want to have your NPCs overshadow the PCs. So none of my NPCs were the same level as the PCs. They were always a little bit lower in level. Never quite as good as the PCs. They were never quite as maximized or optimized as the PCs. So they were always a little lower in power. But they were helpful. They always did good stuff in combat, in and out of combat, actually. They were good in social situations, a lot of them. They had interesting points to bring up. They had skills that were good and valuable to the party. But they were definitely the secondary characters. None of them ever become a hero in their own right. They are there to assist and facilitate the players only. But I know there's a lot of people who really have this real vehement hatred of really well-developed NPCs that stick around the party for a very long period of time. And I've heard a lot of horror stories from these people who introduce an NPC for some reason that's just super powerful. You know, it's the DM kind of incarnate in the game, and they do everything. They're such a huge, amazing character. They just overshadow the PCs and tell all the PCs how stupid they are. And watch this, I'll kill the dragon myself. You guys are terrible, blah, blah. Which is obviously a terrible idea you don't want to do, because the PCs are the focus of the game. That's the whole point. But, you know, I've found having NPCs in the game is really good. You know, they really get invested. There's a lot of interesting relationships that are born out of this. Obviously, Tiber and Kirika have a relationship that's very interesting. Stacy gets really interested in Zek. They have a very interesting relationship that goes back and forth that really changes Zek's character as the game moves along. You know, my wife also, Stacy, also made an NPC she wanted introduced into the game with her, who is her character's best friend, who sticks around for a while, who's very interesting. You know, Brett's character has an NPC that his story is kind of based around, which is very interesting when we actually start discussing her. But I'm curious what you guys feel. Do you guys have NPCs in the party that are fully fleshed out, very dynamic characters that stick around for a very long time, if not the entire game? Or are your NPCs more characters in the background, maybe a local shopkeep or a politician, or maybe an adventurer who joins you once and twice, who may be very well fleshed out but don't stick around with the party? I'm very curious to see what you guys think. Most of the games I've been in or games I've run have NPCs that are in the party pretty much the whole time, either as love interests or friends or support characters, etc. So I'm very curious. Now, Zek, like we were talking about, is the only NPC that when he joins the party here in Session 2, he never leaves. He is in the party from here until the very last session. Every other NPC kind of comes and goes a little bit, but he is here from the very beginning. And you guys can go on our website, greenphoenixrpg.com. We have a bit of a description for Zek that's going to be up when this episode is posted. So whenever we have a behind-the-screens episode about a new NPC being introduced, we're going to put him up on the website as well, so you can do some little research on him. I'll have his description, a bit more of his backstory up there as well. So there we go. We'll have a much more in-depth conversation about NPCs, the pros and cons of how to make good NPCs with Nate on later, because I feel like it's very important to have a player talk about it as well. Because as a DM, NPCs are great for you because it gives you a chance, like I said, to really play the game. But I want to make sure that the players are having a good time with these NPCs. So I want to have Nate on to talk about that. So like I said, the push and pull of these NPCs is a very useful tool for a DM because it gives Nate a very interesting way to look at both sides of any problem and to actually make large moral decisions without having to judge them in a vacuum. I played Fallout 4, which I'm sure a lot of you did. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there's a very major moral choice that you have to make at some point. You join a bunch of factions in the game, and at one point you have to make a decision as to which faction you're really going to work for and really going to give victory to for the Commonwealth in Fallout 4. My issue I had with that game is it's fantastic. They present the moral issue really well. There's a lot of interesting sides to it. You can really make an argument for most of the factions being correct. But I wish I could have gone to the NPCs in that game, Piper or whoever, and said to them, like, look, I don't know this world as well as you. Because in that game you wake up, having the world already been made around you. So you don't know everything that's been going on. So I wish I could go to them and say, look, this is the issue that I'm having. Here's the choices I'm being presented with. What do you think? Just to be able to bounce ideas off this person. These big moral choices are great in games. They really get your players talking and thinking, really discussing this sort of thing. And we have quite a few in this game. We have one actually involving Othmaren much later in the game with Tiber and the rest of the party arguing about what to do. I'm not going to give anything away either, but they actually talk in-game for about an hour on this moral decision they have to make, which is really interesting to me. I love that. I just sat back and watched them talk and answer questions when they ask questions to the NPCs. But having an NPC, really as there for the players, or player in this case, as a moral sounding board is extremely useful, I find. Fallout 4 is very frustrating because I couldn't do that. I couldn't go to the NPCs and say, look, I have to make a moral choice based on the world that you really have been living in more than I have. What do you think I should do based on the evidence that I've been given, one way or the other? But there's no way to do that. It's very frustrating to do that, to have to make this huge moral choice that was going to change the entire outcome of this area of the world with no input from the people actually living in it. So I feel like if NPCs are well developed, either in the party or at least outside the party, but are recurring enough that they become, friends to the party members, it lets the world feel more alive. You need people in the game to make it feel alive. You can have great events going on around you and politics and whatnot, but if the people in the world aren't very dynamic or interesting, it feels flat to me. So that's really what this was really good for, because I had Zek and Kirika both here to give Nate counterpoints to decisions he was doing, but also he could talk to them and get some feedback based on their opinions, because both of them were coming at any problem that Nate came across in very different ways. Zek was very interested in finding Othmaren and killing him, and killing Zaros and the Lizardmen. Kiriko was very interested in getting the Chalice back to fix the problem that was looming. Killing Othmaren was kind of a secondary issue to her. Even killing him, she didn't really necessarily think was, at this point anyway, necessary maybe? She didn't really know. But for Zek, that was everything to him, was killing Othmaren, killing Zaros, getting revenge for his wife and children. So it gives Tiber really back and forth. What am I doing here? Because really what was Tiber's motivation at this point? And they hadn't really totally figured that out yet either. That also becomes a big deal later going on. So the end of the session, like I said, I gave some exposition to Nate about Soth. Really kind of gave him a direction for what was going on and everything. Pushed him towards Brookbridge, and everything was moving along in the storyline, which is good. I hadn't planned on Rickard ever really being an active participant in the party. He was much younger than Tiber. Tiber, at this point in the game, I think was about 20 years old. I think Rickard was maybe 16 or 17. So he was young. I thought he'd be a nice counterpoint whenever Nate was home. Tiber talking to his brother, because his brother could kind of, rib him a bit about stuff, since he, had that ability being his brother. He kind of had that leeway other party members wouldn't. But again, Nate really wanted Rickard in the party. So I was fine with that. So I made Rickard, she kind of give him a bit more of a backstory, a bit more of a fleshed out to him, which you guys will obviously see next session. Rickard has some unlucky adventures with Tiber. You'll see very soon. The next two sessions are rather rough on Rickard. I didn't intend either of those things that happened to him coming up to happen. It was all the dice. But it informs the character very, very much. So that was very interesting. But I took it as a compliment that Nate was really getting invested in these characters and in the storyline, that he was trying to bring more characters into the game. And that's really what really struck me, is that my player really wanted more NPCs, more conversations, more people involved in his life. So I really took that, like I said, I took that as a compliment that he was getting invested in this game. So that's very important to me. So next session, the stakes are really raised. We meet a new villain who's really intimidating, who sticks around a little bit. We see that this issue with the Chalice and Othmaren is really stepping up. Everything's really moving forward. And this is really where the game really gets started. The first two sessions here obviously were set up, building some plot, getting some characters introduced, and the next two sessions are really the story. It really, really gets going in the next two sessions, especially session 4. We're going to have Nate on after the recap of session 4, because it's a really big deal. And then we'll go on from there, and we'll have some conversations on that. But, let me know what you think about plot. Do you think, am I right about plot? Am I wrong about plot? Is plot really the end-all, be-all? Can you not have a good game with a really simplistic plot that's really just tailored to the players but doesn't really do very much? Or do you really need a really interesting dynamic plot? Is it important for the DM to really rack his or her brain, really push themselves to make an amazing plot? Or is it really just more important to, make the plot tailored to the players and have a good time? Or could you not have a good time if the plot's not really good? And then also with NPCs, do you guys have a lot of NPCs in game in the party, or is it really just the PCs running around doing their own thing, and NPCs really in and out of the game, but not really a major part of the party or the plot itself? So next next episode, we're going to talk about session 3, which is going to be called The Prison. Like I said, it's a big beginning towards the turning point of the game. And then we'll have a recap of that from my point of view, and then session 4, and then we'll have Nadon to talk about his opinions of the game so far, and also session 4, which is a really big deal, like we've been saying. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast in this video. Like I said before, you can go to our website, greenphoenixrpg.com. We have the description of Zek up there as well. We're going to have a few more NPCs being introduced pretty soon, so they'll be up as well whenever we have the behind the screens episode after that session where they were introduced. So take a look at that. You can also have links to our YouTube channel, our podcast, Twitter account, and Facebook account. And again, if you like this podcast and you want us to keep giving you some recaps of my story here and some specific examples of how to really improve your game, which we're going to get much more into in the next couple of sessions when the plot really gets started. We're going to be very detailed and specific on how to really improve your game. Please support the podcast. We have a Patreon page, patreon.com/greenphoenixrpg. You can go there. Even $1 a month goes a long way in supporting the podcast. We have different tiers and rewards there, which I'd love to see people take advantage of. And again, if you have any questions or comments, suggestions for future shows, or you disagree with what I'm saying here or agree with it, either leave a comment, give us a review on iTunes and talk about it there, or email us at greenphoenixrpg@gmail.com. So thank you very much for listening. I really look forward to hearing from all of you, and I'll see you on the other side.